I'm going to ask you some good background questions so that people might, finally understand this grant process.
Sure.
But I would love to get this resolution on the floor. So we have a resolution authorizing 2020 Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security, CARES Act, Federal Transit Administration, Section 5307, grant application for TCAT, that's the Tompkins Consolidated Area Transit, Gadabout, and Tompkins County, ID 9418. Can I get someone to move this? I have Annie, and Henry seconds it. Dwight, can you give us a little bit of a background?
Sure. This is a lot of money, and we're extremely grateful that Congress put this in the CARES Act. They allocated $25 billion for public transit across the country. Our initial allocation was basically $7.9 million. Well, no, that's not right. Let me get to the right part here. The first allocation was just over $7 million. We then had a application process through the state to get additional funding. That was $2.2 million. So we have a total of $9.282 million. The purpose is really to sustain public transportation services and to provide flexibility for emergency transportation services, and I'll go into that in a second. After working both with TCAT, Gadabout, county staff, including Jason, we came to the allocation of for TCAT a total of rounding it up, $9 million, Gadabout just over $1 million, and the county of $379,000. I will say that New York State DOT, they did the allocation for the $2.2 million, and it was their decision in terms of that the county would receive money for mobility management. We have a very robust program through Cornell Cooperative Extension, and they've done a lot more work relating to COVID-19. And basically that allocation to the county means that we will have money in our budget to be reimbursed on time, as opposed to our regular process of waiting for the state. As you know, waiting for the state right now can be a very long wait during this time of budgetary crisis. So I will say that I really worked on Gadabout's amount because, in my opinion, Gadabout's budget was extremely vulnerable to the amount of contract work that they were doing. They are the contractor for TCAT, for the Americans with Disabilities Act paratransit service, provided for people who are unable to ride the bus. And since that in and of itself comprised like $740,000, the amount of revenue they would receive through that work was would be significantly down, particularly in 2020 and going into 2021. The feds were extremely interested in getting these. It ended up being two grants for this one program through their process extraordinarily quickly. Um, and I think that it is extraordinarily useful, and it will return revenues to the county. So for example, Jason already asked me that the gadabout subsidy from the county be basically deferred this year from county funds, $97,000. Gadabout will pay for that out of their $1,006,000. And my understanding is that there are discussions at the TCAP board relative to the county and the city and Cornell's share in terms of returning or replacing the local shares for 2020, which is a very critical year. The money does not expire, but we needed to include an end date. The end date that we included is December 31, 2021. And from
Dwight,
what
can I just cut in for a second?
Yes.
That the funding, this almost 10 million, you're saying that there's an end date of using it?
Well, we needed to provide a preliminary end date of 12/31, 21, but it could be used past that period.
And how much of the TCAT total budget does this potentially, it sounds like you're talking about a replacement?
Well, what this is, TCAT's total budget when they're operating 100% is 15 million something. So this is like about half. Gadabout's total budget is like 1.6 million when they're completely operating. And this is much more than that. And what's important is that it can only be used for to reimburse eligible expenses. Like you have to expend money to get reimbursed. It isn't like, oh, this is a replacement of this amount of money, be it state money, be it local money, be it fair revenue, and you can like hold on to it. No, you have to operate, you need to have expenses, and then you can be reimbursed with this money.
But it's unrestricted operating funds.
Right, and they are 100% federal. Normally operating assistance is 50% federal and 50% non-federal. One of my greatest concerns from March on relates to the state transit operating assistance program. TCAT gets about $5 million from, this is called the STOA program. It's based on formula, number of passengers, number of miles. And what's important though is that 80% of the state funding for STOA comes from two dedicated tax sources, which everybody anticipated would be greatly reduced for the first half of this year. And the state only pays out what they take in. So I suggested to both TCAT and Gadabout to anticipate a 30% reduction in state aid, and which is significant for both parties. And without this CARES Act, we would really be up a tree. But the CARES Act for us at our scale is providing us and a very welcome cushion, a very welcome opportunity to cover the budget crisis that would otherwise impact this essential service.
All right, Martha has a question.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Dwight. Maybe I missed it because the fan is going on in the room. It's a little hard to hear you. So you're saying that this money replaces approximately 2/3 of TCAT's budget? Is that what I heard?
No, it replaces just over half.
Okay.
2/3 of Gadabout.
The 2/3 was Gadabout.
Okay. And the COVID-related expenses, what would they be? And also, was TCAT eligible for the PPP benefits?
Both TCAT and Gadabout were successful in signing up for PPP. And that's been extremely useful.
Okay, so what are the COVID-related expenses that are?
Well, the first, we've had taxi expense taking people to the COVID testing site. I also reached out to Meals on Wheels to understand what their expenses have been, because that demand has gone up a lot. And Gadabout has also been delivering food, not to individuals, but moving food to a central warehouse. And so there are these expenses that have been going on that very well what happens in the future may increase. And we have flexibility. What's important though is that since these are non-traditional public transportation expenditures, there's a waiver process to get approval by the Federal Transit Administration. They approve a waiver for 12-week intervals. And so we've applied for the waiver and we are waiting for an answer.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry, I have one clarification to Martha's and then Henry. I'm confused at how this is unrestricted operating funds, but simultaneously needs to only be used for COVID-related expenses.
No, it's not. What I'm referring to for COVID-related expenses is $150,000 of the county share.
Okay, but all of the federal is unrestricted.
Well, it is all federal.
Except for the county share. That's $389,000.
Right. And that unrestricted, I will clarify it, that it is only to be used for eligible federal public transportation program expenses. If they want to do something outside of that scope, they need to get a waiver.
Okay, and delivering food like Gadabout would need a waiver, for example.
Delivering food by Gadabout is okay because they're using federal federal funded vehicles by a regular agency that receives federal transit funding. Okay. reimbursing Meals on Wheels for their transportation expenses requires a waiver. It's a completely third-party agency that has no link to the FTA, and their programs by themselves would not normally be eligible for federal transit funding.
Henry?
Yes, will TCAT have a problem spending all the funding?
I bet you that between all of the three parties and the TCAP board and so forth, I don't think that there's going to be an issue for expending the funding. Because in part the largest unknown relates to the state aid. My estimate right off the bat is that they're going to be short 2 million plus on state aid just for this year. And that will probably continue over into next year. I also expect that there's some other revenue. I don't understand all of the local revenue implications of this, except that normally the county, city, and Cornell share for their operating budget is just under $1 million each per year. And that may, by their decision, I would not be surprised if that is all rebated back or it's all funded through this funding source.
So they'll be able to replace the state funding with this federal funding?
Yes.
Okay.
And they would be able to replace the local funding with it also.
And one other clarification, did you say that we would need to spend it and we can use it to reimburse? Did I catch that?
Yes. All of the federal programs are reimbursement programs.
Okay.
So you have to spend it, and then the county finance controls the reimbursement process, and it's surprisingly fast. So for example, once TCAT or Gadabout, they submit the documentation to county finance, within 2 to 3 days, the money is processed and it's transmitted to the county, and the county has 48 hours to pay TCAT and Gadabout. So compared to the state, this is warp 10.
It's what?
Warp 10, to
Okay.
use a Star Trek metaphor. Sorry.
No, that's great. I got it. I have a fan, so I couldn't hear you. No, I appreciate it. Annie.
Thank you. Well, now that you mentioned Star Trek, tribbles are in my head now. And
I love that episode.
yes, so I was going to ask about the speed of the reimbursement. So that's thanks for talking to us about that. And I guess the only other thing, it's absolutely, and of course, a no-brainer to approve this. And I just wanted to thank you, though, for telling us about Gadabout and making sure that's a priority. As having worked in healthcare and having a lot of seniors in my district and people with disabilities, that's it's a great service, and we're really lucky to have that here in the county.
What has been very nice is that Gadabout's ridership stayed at the lowest, it was like 30% of what it would normally be. and now it's over 40%. I will actually know next week. They're both TCAT and Gadabout send me their ridership and miles report as we apply for state aid for the quarter. TCAT's ridership at the lowest was just under 10% of what it would normally be. They had also significantly reduced their service. So what I've asked from both Gadabout and TCAT is for them to send the county their working budget for 2020 that evolves during the year. And so we will work very, very closely with our, very valuable partners here and shepherd through this process. I've also heard in terms of the House bill is that they would have an additional appropriation for public transit of about 20% from the CARES Act. And that being the case, if that works through, we could anticipate having like $1.9 million later.
Additional.
Yeah.
It's good to hear. One last question, and then Martha, Martha, you go first.
Thank you. Dwight, are we at any point going to get an accounting of how many taxi trips were taken to the testing site? And because actually I'm still waiting to hear that there's been a second site downtown, and I haven't heard that's happened at all. And so I'm those are connected in my mind. I wonder.
Sure. Yes, I'd be very happy to report back about all of the trips that have been made.
So you don't have that now, but you can get that to us and send it to the committee, send it to Kathy. I think probably the full legislature would love to see that. I think it's a great question, Martha.
Okay.
Thank you.
And one last, I'm not sure how connected you are to the FISH program at the Human Services Coalition.
Yes.
And I'm curious if that is something for anybody who doesn't know it. It's a great program where volunteers pick up people in the community and drive them to doctor's appointments and medical related and any, I think even things like going to pharmacies to pick up medication.
Yes.
Would that be eligible? I think like Meals on Wheels is an amazing program. This also is an amazing program and it gets overlooked a lot.
We have funding to reimburse mileage for FISH operators, and we also reimburse 211's trip management that they do for a FISH using existing federal transit funds.
Great, that's wonderful. And to do that, to use this funding, that would be something else that would need a waiver, correct?
No, it would not need a waiver. It's just that FISH during the peak of the local pandemic that we had earlier, FISH was not operating. And I understand that they have begun to start operating. And so they have money in the bank, I'll put it that way.
Okay. Well, I know a lot of the volunteers are seniors, so
Yes.
It's definitely putting them at risk, and I understand why they were not able to operate.
Exactly.
I know we have a legislative meeting tonight at 5:30. We are now all wonderfully educated about this particular resolution, and I greatly appreciate it, Dwight. I'd love to take a vote on this. So I think we have to do a roll call, Kathy. I'm going to start that. Annie?
Yes.
Henry,
Yes.
Martha,
Yes.
and I'm a yes. And Mike Ziegler is excused. Great excuse. And I think that is a unanimous support. Dwight, thank you so much for doing all
Great.
of the work. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And with that, I would like to call this meeting to a close and adjourn. I don't think we need a vote for that. Thank you guys, everybody, and I'll see you in 20 minutes.
Okay,
Thank
bye-bye.
you, Anna. Dwight, thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.